Just as we were settling down for the long weekend, the government brought out this wonderful long 38-page Gazette notification, which positively ruined my weekend because I was trying to decipher the taxes that were in it. And I didn't get very far because it looks very complicated. To help us understand what all these taxes are and what it means for us, we have this evening brought in an expert. Good evening and welcome to Face to Face. We have with us Mr. Dhanusha Gihan Pathirana, noted economist, and he is a frequent guest on our show. Welcome, Dhanusha.
Thank you so much, Nilesh.
Right, Dhanusha, you're going to help us to figure out what this gazette means, all these complex looking import taxes, some of which we understand, some of which we don't. But basically, there's been a little bit of a flurry of activities where vehicles are concerned, because a lot of people are waiting for February, just a few weeks ago, in order to purchase new vehicles, because the government is going to allow the import of new vehicles once again after a very long time. So what do these new taxes mean for vehicles being imported, Dhanusha?
Thank you so much, Nilesh, once again for having me. So with regard to vehicles, I think there is a huge propaganda going on, especially with the vehicle importers lobby, saying that there is a significantly high taxation coming on to vehicle imports this time with the changes that have been announced by the government, and thereby I suppose the domestic prices have been sort of pushed up. But looking at the numbers a bit more closely shows something quite different. Especially I now, for instance, looked at 1000cc to 1500cc category, where mostly the imports are taking place, and there are luxury imports also, which I didn't actually go into. But looking at those categories, we can clearly say the tax increase ranges between 5 to 6% only. For instance,
so there is an increase.
Definitely there is an increase, but not to the extent what the importers are saying. They said that okay, my God, prices will shoot up something like 50%. Yes, the prices will shoot up 50%. That is because the currency has depreciated, well, far more than that. So it is not an effect that has come about through these changes in the taxation. So for instance, before these changes, we had per cubic centimeter tax of 3,650 for vehicles coming between 1,000 to 1,300. Now this has gone up to 3,850. So that's like a 5% increase. From 1,003 to 1,500, earlier the rate was 4,200. Now this has gone up to 4,450, which is around 6% increase. So it's the if at all there is a price increase that has come about with the depreciation, and that was always there since, let's say, since 2022.
So when you say depreciation,
yeah,
and you're talking about the massive depreciation of the rupee,
yeah,
which we saw during the last few months of Gotabaya Rajapaksa's regime, when it basically went up to 400 or over 400 to the dollar, but of course it has since come back down. But you are comparing the pre-22 era and what it is now.
Yeah, before the imports were actually restricted or completely restricted, and what we are facing right now in terms of the exchange rate. So there we see over 50% depreciation. So on that account, yes, you can say the prices have moved up, but not with regard to, not as a result of the new tax changes. So what this would mean is that these taxes will not be actually sort of reducing the demand in terms of the taxes. Yes, the depreciation effect is there, but still, if you look at the incomes of our corporates with the price increases, their incomes have also increased, especially in line with the rate of depreciation. So, in that segment of our population, it appears clearly that their incomes have kept pace with the rate of depreciation. Therefore, I personally would not see the demand coming down as a result of all this, and especially not as a result of the new taxes, because the new taxes do not we do not see a significant change or significant increase with the level which was already there. So that means that we will be actually facing the deluge of imports, because this is coming after now almost 5 years, and we should not forget the fact that there are what you call these the permits, tax permits waiting, which have been also accumulated likewise the demand.
So when you say the permits
of the government servants,
duty-free permits, which many government servants are entitled to.
Around, I think, 50,000 roughly we have government servants who are entitled to these permits, and those permits alongside the demand for vehicles have also been accumulated. Now all this will be coming into the market, not just the demand, the permits will also come to the market. So now that is where the problem lies with regard to government's income, which now government is banking its hopes on these imports, and then therefore they'll be able to get some tax revenue out of this.
In rupee terms.
In rupee terms. So, but I suppose that expectation might not be to the level that they expected, because of, we see all these permits coming into the market at the same pace.
So Dhanusha, correct me if I'm wrong, but now if I had a duty-free permit,
right,
and now after a very long time the government is allowing new vehicles to be imported,
yeah,
I would certainly buy a vehicle, because I wouldn't know, after 3 months would the government shut it down again? We just don't know what would happen.
Yeah.
There's no indication of that yet, but basically I'd take my chance and buy a vehicle, use my permit, or if I don't have the money, I would sell the permit, which is something that is commonly done.
Yeah.
So somebody else would then use that duty-free permit to bring in a vehicle,
yeah,
in which case the government is actually earning very little tax revenue from that.
Absolutely, absolutely. So, so there you go. I mean, now they are banking heavily on this removing this import restriction, and which will result in an increase in tax revenue, because government has to hit 15% of the GDP as tax revenue this year if they want to keep in line with IMF program, which they can do if they look at the tax concessions or tax holidays given to the multinationals and the corporates, which amounts to over 4% of the GDP. So they can easily achieve more than this 15% way, because right now we are at somewhere around 13%. Without further burdening the general public, but that is not what we are seeing. So actually what they are trying to do right now is that, of course, now certain amount of now we should also look at these essentials that the government promised that they will reduce certain taxes like VAT on education supplies, medicine, and essential food items, and also these ad hoc taxes like the special commodity tax slammed on essential food items. Now these oppressive taxes are already there,
so they haven't been removed.
As promised, and there is a huge outcry by the public, although it is not so vocal, that demand is simmering among the public, and but the government has not so far has addressed this issue. And what we are seeing is that without further increasing the taxes on these essentials, they've gone on to bank their hopes on these vehicle imports, but they are also, as far as I see, they might not achieve what they're hoping for because of the conditions I just highlighted.
No,
and the second point I want to also put down is we would also see a significant amount of under invoicing in this because Sri Lanka is famous for this, especially in the vehicles market. Most of the vehicles that are already running around in our public roads are also most possibly they are under invoiced, which is like a known secret among the importers. You speak to a vehicle.
I mean, it's not a secret at all. I think
it's not a secret at all. Actually, everybody knows it. So that challenge is also there. So government, I don't see have been at least taking the initiative to address this issue, which has already been highlighted by the Ways and Means Committee under the Public Finance Committee of the Parliament, which was formerly headed by Dr. Harsha De Silva. So the report is put down by the Ways and Means Committee. So these issues are there. I don't see a constructive effort by the government to address these.
Now the government's plan, long term, is to bring in automation, digitalization,
right,
to help cut down on such practices like under invoicing and all the customs rackets which are run and so on. But obviously that's not going to happen overnight. Digitalization will take many months, and I mean it would take many months in a private sector organization. So with the government it might take a year or two even. So we can't sort of bank on digitalization to sort out that mess.
True. At the same time, Niresh, this dialogue has been very much alive since, at least as far as since 2021. I think when personally I was involved in raising this issue, especially with this is I mean going out of hand, especially in 2021. We had even when our imports were heavily restricted, we had the country's highest monthly import bills recording in 2021. So which was not going into any production at all. Our production was collapsing. So this issue, despite the fact that it will take some time, the dialogue has been there, and so there is considerable amount of awareness even among the government officials. So at least they should take these measures or put the initial steps. Take the initial steps in now, for instance, institutes like the Global Financial Integrity. I personally know, I have even communicated with the central bank officials some time back, that they have already set up these what you call digital platforms that they provide real-time data on these type of practices. You just have to feed the information into their systems, and they are on real time. They alert you when, especially central banks and so on.
No, what you're saying is that in other countries, the world over, such digitalized systems exist, and we don't have to sort of reinvent the wheel. We just have to get those systems and
start initializing,
put them in place. It's not like there's a bunch of computer programmers who are sitting there, programming.
Start everything from scratch. No,
it's not, right? So the issue is not a lack of digitalization apparatus. It is simply that our government sector has been resisting this for years.
Absolutely.
They just don't want anything digitalized.
Because Niresh, it's not just the direct imports and exports we see that this process is actually catering to. It is also now, for instance, there is some misappropriation of funds. Let's, for instance, assume, we don't even have to assume, that is taking place, for instance, with our public debt and so on. So much of evidence is there. So these type of funds, even the IMF had said in their diagnostic, that corruption diagnosis, these funds have flown out of the country. So many recognized institutions, even including the Asian Development Bank, have pointed out over 80% or 85% of these funds, the flowing out or the flows happens through this mechanism. So it's not just, let's say, traders trying to, evade taxes and so on, or exporters trying to keep their incomes abroad. Even the tax frauds or corruptions that are happening domestically, because obviously anyone could understand, if you keep those incomes in your own bank accounts within the country, you are more liable to get litigation against you. So it is safer for you to transfer these income out of the country to much more safer destinations. So this mechanism
that stands to reason, Dhanusha, because we are talking about corruption in the hundreds of millions of rupees or even billions of rupees. And what do you do if you have $1 billion rupees? What in the world are you going to buy in Colombo?
Absolutely.
I mean, you might buy an estate somewhere, but you're not going to buy 10 estates. It's just one, maybe two. You'll buy a couple of vehicles and maybe a posh apartment. What else can you spend on in Sri Lanka? So what you do is you take that money, take it overseas,
in a split second,
and you invest it. Apartment in London, Las Vegas, wherever. Or it could be simply in Singapore, Dubai, closer to home. I mean, these are aspects which we all know. That's what happens. So what you're saying is that the money which is cheated from the government and the public ends up going overseas.
Absolutely. And speaking of corruption, and with regard to this new gazette, now there is two things what we have to say. I'll first highlight what is actually inside the gazette. Now, recently, or in 2022, there was an audit report published by our Audit General's department. They highlighted the fact that these vehicle assembly, so-called vehicle assembly companies, are misusing the opportunity to get tax relief, citing the fact that they are creating value inside the country and so on. So therefore, there is an opportunity for them to get tax relief for their imports of the component parts which they do. But this particular report highlighted, by getting the minister involved, the minister has the power to determine what amount of value addition you have done. So even if you had done zero value addition, minister can declare, okay, let's say you import the entire vehicle in components, right? So I'm highlighting this because the particular report has said we have lost over 100 billion rupees between 2006 to 2021, if I remember the final year correctly, for 14 years, 100 billion, over 100 billion. So this has been going into the hands of the subject minister and these firms who import. So the same criteria, same condition is repeating in this particular gazette. If you look at the final pages, it says the minister gets to decide what is the ratio of value addition the particular company has done, and therefore what is the tax concession or tax relief that particular vehicle assembly firm is entitled to.
Now, Dhanusha, this government, the NPP government, it harps on the fact that it's against corruption and its ministers and its MPs and so on are honest people and so on and so forth. But on the other side, the business community and the bureaucracy certainly have not changed their ways, because they haven't had to yet. There's no real indication that they would also say, okay, we are all going to be very honest in our business dealings, because this was part and parcel of the way they did business.
Absolutely,
because perhaps when they approach a minister, they will be told nothing doing. This is the NPP government doesn't behave like this, but we can't really think that those who have been used to giving the bribes are not going to at least try to do so.
Yeah, so because here also we see the same sort of corrupt practices being repeated. This the legal infrastructure has been is proposed again, because it's not a new thing. This has been criticized over a period of time. Like, if you see, there are plenty of news articles that appeared on criticizing this practice of allowing the minister to decide what is the rate of value addition, and according to the particular rate of value addition, the company will get the tax relief ratio will change. For instance, if your rate of value addition is over 60%, you only have to pay 10% of the entitled taxes. So that means you get a 90% tax relief. And if your value addition is over 30%, your tax relief is much low. So the minister gets to decide that. There is no objective criteria or a more thoroughgoing, let's say, a more technical process how to decide on the amount of or the value addition these importing companies are doing. So therefore,
but the minister is a politician, so the minister has to depend on a technical team.
Yes.
But in the end, what most of the laws and regulations say is that the powers are with the minister. Exactly. So even if a technical team gives one recommendation, the minister can very well ignore it and go with his own decision.
Exactly. So that is where the problem is, because that loophole has been exploited by both the government bureaucrats and the minister, the former ministers and these importers, and the numbers are very clear, and these audit reports are showing over 100 billion has been lost over a period of 14 years. So that issue is very much there, and so this means that there could be there are this particular new gazette has retained the loopholes that the traders and the government bureaucrats can exploit to evade the taxes that are already in place. So, this is a government that is now very much keen on increasing its, compared to former governments, which they were not so worried about. But right now, this particular government is very much keen on pushing up their government revenue. So, now that is the background.
Now, this need for government revenue, Dhanusha, has there been a concerted effort to reduce government expenditure? I don't see it. Of course, we have the ministers and the MPs are, their lifestyles are excellent. You don't see these huge convoys of vehicles, or that extravagance has gone out. But that's only one part of it, isn't it? The major components of government expenditure are in other areas.
Yes.
For example, the military budget, the defense budget is the largest budget in all the ministries. We haven't heard of any particular steps to reduce that.
That is particularly worrying, because this government, they have very clearly, like what you highlighted, Niresh, they have clearly cut down on the extravagance of the political elite, that they were, the scandalous type of expenditure which they were, completely destroying government resources. So that has been, we can say, completely put down. But like what you pointed out, especially the expenditure on military remains extremely high. Now, even this interim budget or the initial proposal, you see over 400 billion rupees allocated for military. One thing, I think it's because even if we look at the times during the war, 80% of the expenditure went in as recurrent expenditure, that is for maintaining the soldiers, and only rest of the 20% went into capital expenditure, that is like artillery and stuff like that. So still you can account for a 20% reduction. We don't see even at least that is happening. If we are holding on to that same amount of the size of the military, which is one of the largest, I suppose, in the world if you take per capita in terms of our population. So that is there. And even more than that, I think I have repeatedly highlighted this issue, is our interest expenditure, which is still absolutely the largest in the world, compared to as a ratio of our government revenue. I've also said that the second, which is around 40%, ours is close to 80%, which is almost twice. So we have to see where all this tax revenue is going after people are, breaking their backs to pay the taxes. What is happening to this money?
No.
It's mostly going into the people who own the debt. That is the domestic debt. So the banks, conglomerates, the big fish are, milking the public without public even seeing it. So this is the tragedy which they have to address.
Now hold that thought, because we'll get into that a little bit more, Dhanusha. We'll take a short commercial break right now and we'll be right back.
Our development era kickstarts from 2002-2005.
If you're off duty, right, you're entitled to do what you want. And Niresh, whether it's pluck coconuts or whether it's scraping the coconuts, they have the freedom to do that.
By having taxes on imports for the food on the poorest of the poor is a big problem.
I think economic inclusion of the rural people is very important to keep the economy going.
Government and state are two things. So time to time we need restructuring. We can't go on. That is the main reason why NPP won.
Face the Nation every Wednesday at 9:30 p.m. on TV1.
This is where dreams take flight, where stars are born, and the future of international cricket shines the brightest.
She is setting the stage alight.
16 nations will compete for World Cup glory in Malaysia.
She is putting on a show here.
And they are champions.
The ICC Under-19 Women's T20 World Cup 2025 begins January 18 on TV1.
Welcome back to Face to Face. We are with Dhanusha Gihan Pathirana and we're talking about the economy and what's going on in and around it. Now, Dhanusha, you referred to the interest payments and the fact that most of the government revenue just seems to be going, to pay off this interest, which is, not something you can get out of. What are the recommendations there?
Yeah, for instance, if we take Niresh, what the government did in terms of the ISBs for the so-called local bondholders, they issued, if I'm not mistaken, 25% or 30, I think it's 25, not 30, 25% of the total holdings they converted into rupee bonds. And what was the interest rate that they issued for these bonds? They gave policy rate plus 50 basis points. So that was for the ISBs, that is for the foreign debt. That means to say 8.5%, right? And the rate will also fluctuate depending on the policy rate fluctuations. Obviously, it looks like it will go down, but if we have a currency crisis, looking at which we can also talk about later, the rates will go up. But apart from that, the rates are relatively low at 8.5%. But we are still, so they have reduced the rates for these domestically issued ISBs or restructured foreign debt. But why aren't they could apply the same mechanism now that these domestic banks are okay at accepting that rate of 8.5%. They can similarly restructure the yields. They don't have to go into the maturity rates or the capital expenditure. They can certainly renegotiate the yields of the high interest cost bonds that were issued in 2022 and 2023, or even before that. Before that also we were issuing at rates much higher, like much higher in the sense over 12 to 13%. These rates can be effectively brought down to 8.5%. In that case, I did a rough calculation because I am part of the United Federation of Labour, which we put out some certain budget proposal which the government could take into account. So in 2023, government paid roughly around 1,800 billion in rupees for interest for government bonds, not the bills, just the bonds, roughly around 1,800 billion.
1.8 trillion.
1.8 trillion.
Rupees.
Huge amount. Rupees. I mean, just to put this into perspective, our entire wage bill of the government is about 1.1 trillion. So for bonds alone, we are paying
and
almost.
Our wage bill is very high.
Is high. That's what everybody is saying. Like, you know, you speak to all these neoliberal institutes, that's what they're highlighting. But they don't highlight the relatively higher aspect of interest incomes going into other these you know, financial elites' hands. And also, let me not mention the tax concessions, which is also close to 1 trillion, almost equal to our entire wage bill. So coming back to this, if we bring down these rates to around 8, actually did already practice some consensus around that matter with the banks and the holders of the ISBs. You bring that down to 8.5%, our interest bill according to 23 numbers will come to 1 trillion and 20 billion, that is 1,020 billion rupees from 1,800. You're saving something like 780 billion there, right? And that is huge because you know, in 2024 government did these introduced the VAT, raised it to 18% and expanded its net. They only expected 720 billion out of that in addition, right? So this is almost equal to that or a bit more than that. So that is to say, if you can, there are certain things that you can do to ease the pressure on the public, especially because if you, for instance, if you give up these taxes that are actually so oppressive on the public, like the taxes on essential food, essential medicine and education supplies, that will come to something like 250 to 300 billion rupees, Niresh. But here, so you can let go of all that and double up your saving by simply renegotiating the rates on your bonds, because the market rates have already come down. So this is not, you're not going against the market.
Now, Dhanusha, one thing that we were discussing earlier before the program was the state of our foreign reserves, our forex reserves, yes, to be precise. Now, this is what got us in trouble and into bankruptcy in the first place. Yeah. In 2022, basically, the country ran out of foreign exchange. We couldn't pay for our petrol, our diesel, our gas, whatever, and everything ground to a halt. So we have to be very, very careful about this. Yeah. Now, of course, the Ranil Wickremesinghe regime basically reduced the imports of major items such as vehicles to the point where we were not then spending very much on these major imports. And as a result, we started building up our forex reserves. And I think throughout 2024, for the most part, it was increasing, which is always a good sign. nothing to write home about. It wasn't some huge amount, but at least it was going in the right direction. But what happened in the last 2 months of 2024?
Yeah, Niresh, now as a result of that increase, what we are seeing is that the monthly import bill has, as we have also highlighted previously, pushed up to around 1.7 billion, which is about 25% increase from the lower levels, which are the levels we can actually sustain, like $1.4 billion per month. Now that was the case in the first 6 months, and that's where our exports were hitting the pre-crisis levels. So we were recording current account surpluses. As a result, central bank was purchasing from the market, that is foreign exchange. So the reserves are built up, but we shouldn't forget about the central bank's debt that comes to about 4 to 5 billion, which is not recorded in the public debt, because now central bank is an independent institution. So that debt is shown separately in the central bank accounts. So now as a result of increasing imports and our exports have been stagnating around $1 billion per month, our reserves as a result has fallen by 100 million in November, 400 million again in December. This is the latest.
So that's not good at all.
That's not good at all, especially because this is even before the vehicle imports have now started and our new debt repayments. Now, a couple of months ago, Niresh, in our programs, we were saying, look, we will have a total debt repayments minimum coming to 4.1 billion in 2025. Responding to this, Dr. Kumaraswamy and them, no, my God, they were saying, no, this is not I don't believe that the numbers are so huge, that the numbers are far less. But now the central bank governor himself had come out in an interview with the magazine Central Banker. He himself had said, we have to pay 4 to 5 billion this year in foreign debt alone. So we were paying roughly 1 billion a year since 2022 to finance our multilateral debt. Now on top of that, we had to pay, according to him, 4 to 5, another 3 to 4, that means. So that means minimum 3 billion, which was our calculation, coming up to, if you take the ISBs as a result of the debt restructure, and not to forget the Reserve Bank of India swap facility that is due. Minimum 1 billion is due this year. So all that is coming up, and even before that, we are saying our reserves collapsing by 500 million. And right now our usable dollar reserves, Niresh, are at 4.7 billion. So that is excluding the Chinese swap facility, but right now, according to central bank figures, as just I checked, they have, I think, renegotiated to with the Chinese People's Bank of China, which they have the swap facility of 1.4 billion USD, but in Chinese yuan, 10 billion, to push that further down the line. So that doesn't appear in their obligations for the next 12 months, central bank, which was there earlier. A month ago it was there. Now there is another 2 billion with the Indian Reserve Bank is there. So which means to say, we are looking at an additional foreign exchange demand. Now the other point is the vehicles. Now again Kumaraswamy was saying, oh my God, no, we won't be having so much of imports, 1.5 billion, because now people are heavily taxed, the currency are depreciated, they don't have money, this thing.
But that goes against reason, because you know, people who have not been able to buy vehicles for years, and whose vehicles are now old, and they're spending a lot on repairs, and the cost of spare parts is through the roof.
Yes.
You know, spare parts which cost you 10,000 rupees about 2 or 3 years ago, now it's 50,000, 60,000. So, you know, the older vehicle gets, the more trouble you have with it. So, people who have older vehicles certainly want to buy new ones. And also this, you know, it's like a movie premiere, isn't it? You open, you know, the show, and you know, people rush.
Absolutely.
And so, of course, 3 months down the road after that, the market would be more regularized and stable. But, you know, we can expect that in February and perhaps March, we'd have some huge influx of vehicles.
Yes, because now the central bank governor himself in this interview, he has agreed, he has said we are looking at now about 1.5 billion worth of vehicle imports. Now the funny thing is, while he is recognizing all this, 4 to 5 billion debt repayments, 1.5 billion in vehicle imports, he is planning to increase the reserves to 7 billion.
But so how is that going to happen?
Because now, well, you know, anyone who is in their correct mind would see the contradiction very clearly, because look, you are looking at 6 more of expenditure, while right now, even before these expenditures are materializing, your reserves are falling even before this. So that means to say your exports must grow exponentially, at least over 30%. In order to keep the reserves intact.
But we haven't seen any such steps to boost exports, and you know, you can't just boost exports overnight. That is a process which takes years.
Yes, and we have to be realistic about what is going on, especially with our export markets, the destination. What is going on in the US right now? US is increasing its interest rates. Highest in for the last 15 years or so, and that means to say the demand will go down, and there will be more demand for the dollar, funds moving out, than the value of the dollar. We are seeing an increase. On the other hand, there is a US deficit staring at them, so there will be budget cuts. That means again reduction in aggregate demand. So all those indicators point to a stagnant demand from our destination. In UK also they increased the interest rates significantly. So UK is a huge market.
Right. So Dhanusha, we are almost out of time, but what you're pointing to is that the international situation, the global situation is also not all rosy, is it?
Yes, because in order to, you know, get out of this this huge excess demand for foreign exchange, or meet it without collapsing our reserves, the only path which the central bank and the government is now talking about is growth of exports. But to be realistic, if you look at the export markets, those are stagnating, and we might even see the demand going down because of the monetary policy changes that we are seeing happening in the West. And on top of that, there is also every likelihood of a spike in oil prices. And if that comes on top of all this, we might end up in a huge problem, which I don't want to imagine.
So we certainly need to be cautious as a nation, and of course this influx of vehicles is something which we on this program have been pointing to for several months now as something which could be somewhat destabilizing, but it remains to be seen. And I'm afraid that's all the time we have for tonight. Thank you very much, Dhanusha Gihan Pathirana, for coming and explaining some of these aspects,
Thank you so much.
especially with regard to the vehicle imports. And thank you to you at home for watching. Don't go away, because the news is coming up next. Have a good evening.
President scheduled to meet with Chinese President tomorrow. Acting Digital Minister assures that the digital identity system possesses no national security threat due to involvement from an Indian institution. The banks of the Gallo River in Ampara are at risk of collapsing. Thai Pongal celebrated in Sri Lanka and across the world. Increasing wind speeds are raising concerns about a potential surge in wildfires across Los Angeles.